The sky above Normandy hung heavy with low cloud on the night of June 5, 1944. In the pre-dawn darkness, a sound unlike any other reached the ears of German sentries positioned along the coastal fortifications. A whisper rather than a roar, a rushing of wind through canvas and wood that seemed to defy the very nature of modern warfare. Oberst Friedrich von der Heydte, commanding the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment near Sainte-Mère-Église, stood in his command bunker studying reconnaissance reports. His aide had just delivered the latest intelligence summary from Berlin, and von der Heydte allowed himself a brief dismissive smile. The Americans, according to captured documents and intercepted communications, were planning to employ large-scale glider operations in any future invasion. Gliders, wooden aircraft without engines. Toys, he had called them during the morning briefing. His officers had laughed, sharing cigarettes and coffee, confident that these fragile contraptions would splinter like kindling against the hedgerows of France, their occupants easy prey for the Wehrmacht's battle-hardened divisions. The laughter would not last through the night. The story of America's combat glider program began not in the skies over Europe, but in the desperate strategic calculations of 1941, when the United States Army watched with alarm as German paratroopers seized Crete and the Dutch bridges with lightning speed. The concept of airborne warfare had proven its devastating effectiveness, but the Americans faced a critical limitation. Transport aircraft were precious, expensive, and in desperately short supply. Every C-47 Dakota was needed for cargo, for paratroopers, for the 1,000 logistical demands of a global war. The solution emerged from an unlikely source: the civilian aviation industry, which had been experimenting with motorless flight since the 1920s. What if soldiers could be delivered not by powered aircraft, but by gliders, silent, engineless craft, towed behind conventional planes and released over enemy territory? The concept seemed absurd to traditional military minds. A glider was, by definition, falling. It had no power, no ability to maneuver once released, no second chances. It was wood and canvas held together with fabric glue and hope, carrying men into combat zones where a single bullet through the fuselage could send everyone tumbling to earth. Yet the mathematics were compelling. A single C-47 could tow a Waco CG-4A glider carrying 13 fully equipped soldiers, effectively doubling the combat power of each transport sortie. Unlike paratroopers scattered across miles of countryside, glider troops would land together, organized, with their heavy weapons intact. Jeeps, artillery pieces, anti-tank guns, equipment that could never be dropped by parachute, could ride inside the glider's cargo bay and roll into action within minutes of landing. Production began in 1942, and here the American industrial miracle revealed itself in ways that would later astonish enemy intelligence analysts. 16 different companies, most of them furniture manufacturers and coffin makers, received contracts to build military gliders. The Waco Aircraft Company, a small outfit in Troy, Ohio, became the primary contractor. Ford Motor Company, Gibson Refrigerator, the Anheuser-Busch Brewery, corporations with no aviation experience whatsoever, transformed their production lines to fabricate wings, fuselages, and tail assemblies from laminated wood, steel tubing, and cotton fabric. By the end of 1943, American factories were producing gliders at a rate of over 1,000 per month, an output that German intelligence officers dismissed as fabricated propaganda when the reports first crossed their desks. The cost per unit was approximately $15,000, roughly 1/10 the price of a powered aircraft. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding the Army Air Forces, described the glider program as getting 10 aircraft for the price of one. The Germans, reading these reports in their Berlin headquarters, remained skeptical. Mass production of wooden aircraft seemed to them a symptom of American desperation, not strength. Their own glider programs, small and specialized, relied on skilled craftsmen producing limited numbers of high-quality machines. The idea that furniture companies could build combat aircraft worthy of military service struck experienced Luftwaffe officers as laughable. Their prey, men selected to fly these wooden warriors, underwent training that would have broken lesser soldiers. At airfields across America, Laurinburg-Maxton in North Carolina, Bowman Field in Kentucky, Alliance in Nebraska, young pilots learned to master an aircraft that responded slowly, descended constantly, and offered no possibility of correction once committed to landing. A glider pilot had one chance. He selected his landing zone from altitude, usually while being towed at 125 miles per hour behind a transport plane, cut loose at the designated release point, and then guided 30 feet of wingspan toward Earth with nothing but air currents and geometry to save him. There was no going around for a second attempt, no engine to power out of a mistake. The landing was inevitable, and it would be hard. Flight Officer Robert Tate, who would later pilot Glider 37 into Normandy, wrote to his mother in March 1944, "We're learning to fly coffins, Ma. Beautiful wooden coffins that dance on the wind. But they're our coffins, and we'll ride them straight to Berlin, if that's what it takes." Training accidents were frequent and often fatal. Gliders struck trees, overshot runways, broke apart on rough landings. The casualty rate during training approached 10%, a figure that would have shut down any conventional flight program. But these were not conventional times. Every glider pilot knew he was volunteering for a mission that combined the worst aspects of paratrooping and crash landing, and yet the applications poured in. They came because they believed in what the glider represented. A weapon born of American innovation, resourcefulness, and industrial might. The German commanders who would face these gliders held very different beliefs about warfare and technology. The Wehrmacht prided itself on engineering excellence, on Krupp steel and Messerschmitt precision, on weapons systems designed by experts and manufactured to exacting standards. Their military doctrine emphasized quality over quantity, the superiority of the professional soldier over the conscript masses. When intelligence reports described the American glider fleet, thousands of wooden aircraft built by furniture makers, flown by pilots with minimal flight hours, carrying soldiers who would essentially crash land into combat, the response was institutional mockery. General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel, inspecting the Atlantic Wall defenses in early 1944, received a briefing on Allied airborne capabilities. According to his aide's diary, Rommel's response to the glider threat was brief. "Let them come in their wooden boxes. We will make firewood of them." This was not mere bravado. The German commanders had rational reasons for their confidence. Their own limited glider operations, such as the assault on Fort Eben Emael in 1940, had used small numbers of specialized troops in surprise attacks against single targets. The idea of landing thousands of soldiers simultaneously in gliders seemed operationally impossible. The logistics alone would be chaotic. Dozens or hundreds of silent aircraft descending in darkness, each pilot navigating independently toward tiny landing zones, all while under fire from alerted defenders. It would be, in the German estimation, a catastrophe of American overconfidence. June 6, 1944, arrived with overcast skies and rough seas, conditions that nearly caused Eisenhower to postpone the invasion. But the Armada sailed, and behind the naval bombardment, behind the first waves of amphibious troops struggling ashore on Omaha and Utah beaches, came the gliders. The first wave had already landed in darkness hours earlier. 52 Horsa and CG-4A gliders carrying pathfinders and specialized assault teams to secure bridges and crossroads inland from the beaches. Now, in the early morning light, came the main force. 176 gliders, each carrying 13 to 15 men, plus jeeps, anti-tank guns, ammunition, and medical supplies. They were towed across the English Channel by C-47 transports, climbing to 2,500 feet as they approached the French coast. German anti-aircraft crews, already overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the invasion, turned their guns skyward and beheld something many had never seen before. A sky filled with engineless aircraft, wave after wave of wooden gliders casting shadows across the Norman countryside. Oberst von der Heide watched them come. The laughter from his morning briefing had vanished. Through his binoculars, he counted the gliders stretching back toward the channel, an aerial armada that defied everything he had been told about American capabilities. His aide stood beside him, voice tight with disbelief. "Herr Oberst, there are hundreds of them." The release began at predetermined points, the tow ropes falling away, and suddenly the Norman sky was filled with silent descending craft, each piloted by a young American who had trained for this moment through countless practice runs over North Carolina pine forests and Kansas wheat fields. The gliders descended in a shallow glide, flaps deployed, the rushing of wind over canvas wings the only sound. German machine gun positions opened fire, tracers arcing upward, some rounds punching through fabric and wood. But the gliders kept coming. They were too many, too spread out, too committed to their landing approach to be stopped by ground fire. Staff Sergeant James Blue, flying as co-pilot in Glider 23, later described the landing. "You're looking down at hedgerows and farm fields coming up fast, trying to spot the landing zone markers, and you realize there's no engine noise. It's quiet, except for the wind and the occasional pop of rifle fire from below. Then the pilot says, 'Brace,' and you're hitting Earth at 70 miles per hour, wheels digging furrows in French soil, the whole glider shaking like it's going to tear apart. We hit a hedgerow and the nose crumpled, but the troops were already out the side door before we even stopped sliding, and I watched them assemble in 30 seconds flat, just like training. We'd crashed a wooden box full of men and equipment into occupied France, and somehow everyone was running toward their objectives like it was another exercise. The landing zones became scenes of controlled chaos. Some gliders touched down perfectly, rolling to gentle stops in designated fields. Others struck trees, sheared off wings, or nosed into ditches. A few broke apart on impact, scattering their cargo across hedgerows. But the remarkable fact, the truth that stunned German defenders and vindicated American planners, was that it worked. Within 20 minutes of the first glider's landing, American airborne troops had assembled with their heavy weapons and were engaging German positions. Jeeps emerged from glider cargo bays. Artillery pieces were unlimbered and brought into action. Command posts were established. The wooden toys had delivered a fully equipped fighting force behind German lines. The German response revealed the depth of their miscalculation. Units positioned to repel seaborne invasion now faced assault from behind. Communications lines were cut. Reinforcement routes were blocked. Oberleutnant Hans Richter, commanding a company of the 91st Air Landing Division, recorded in his after-action report, "We expected scattered paratroopers that could be hunted down in small groups. Instead, we faced organized enemy formations with crew-served weapons and vehicles. They had artillery. They had anti-tank guns. They had mobility, all delivered by aircraft we had been told were insignificant. By 0800 hours, we had lost contact with regimental headquarters and were fighting surrounded." The psychological impact was perhaps more devastating than the tactical surprise. German soldiers, particularly those stationed away from the Eastern Front, had been fed a steady diet of propaganda about American military inadequacy, that the Americans were soft, undisciplined, dependent on material superiority because they lacked fighting spirit. The glider landings shattered that narrative. Here was evidence of meticulous planning, industrial capability, and raw courage. To climb into a wooden aircraft with no engine, knowing you would be towed across the channel and released to glide into combat, required a particular kind of faith. Faith in your training, in your equipment, in the vast industrial machine that had built your transport. It was a faith born of abundance, of a nation that could afford to build thousands of single-use wooden aircraft and consider them expendable. The wooden glider became, in the weeks following D-Day, a symbol that appeared repeatedly in German military correspondence and intelligence assessments. Captured documents reveal a shifting perception. Initial mockery gave way to grudging respect, then to something approaching dread, as the scale of American industrial production became undeniable. A report from O.B. West, the German command authority in France, dated June 15, 1944, analyzed the glider operations and concluded, "The enemy's use of mass-produced wooden assault gliders demonstrates industrial capacity beyond our previous estimates. These are not precision instruments, but mass weapons, produced with the same efficiency as their tanks and trucks. The psychological effect on our troops of seeing the sky filled with these craft cannot be understated. It suggests unlimited resources." The food inside American gliders told its own story. German soldiers who captured intact gliders or overran landing zones found rations that astonished them. K-rations with chocolate bars, cigarettes, instant coffee, canned meat, chewing gum. By 1944, German rations had been reduced to black bread, ersatz coffee, and whatever could be scavenged. The contrast was stark and deliberate. American logisticians understood that well-fed soldiers fought better, and that every chocolate bar and coffee packet was a small psychological weapon, a reminder of industrial abundance. When German prisoners were given American rations during interrogation, their responses were recorded by intelligence officers. Many expressed disbelief that such food was standard issue. Some refused to believe it, insisting it must be special officer rations being used for propaganda purposes. The glider operations continued throughout the European campaign. Operation Market Garden in September 1944 saw the largest airborne operation in history, with 2,596 gliders delivering troops, vehicles, and supplies to Holland. Many landed under fire. Many crashed, but they delivered the British 1st Airborne Division and the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions into battle. And though Market Garden ultimately failed to achieve its objectives, the glider operations themselves were deemed successful. The final major glider operation came during the crossing of the Rhine in March 1945, Operation Varsity, where 906 American gliders landed east of the Rhine in a single day, the largest single-day glider operation of the war. By this point, German defensive capabilities had degraded significantly, but the psychological impact remained. Lieutenant Klaus Werner, captured during Varsity, told his interrogators, "We knew you were coming. We could hear the bombers, the artillery. But then the gliders appeared, more than I could count, and I knew the war was lost. Not because of the soldiers they carried, but because of what they represented. A nation that could throw away thousands of wooden aircraft, use them once and abandon them in German fields, was a nation we could never defeat." 60% of all gliders built during the war were used only once. They were designed to be expendable, and they were expended. Of the 13,909 CG-4A gliders produced, fewer than 100 survived the war intact. They lie now in museums, these wooden frames with fabric wings, looking fragile and primitive beside the metal fighters and bombers they served alongside. But their fragility was their message. America could afford to be fragile. America could build weapons meant to be destroyed, could train pilots for one-way missions in aircraft designed to crash, could deliver soldiers to battle in wooden boxes because there were always more boxes, more pilots, more soldiers, more of everything. The abundance was weaponized. The industrial capacity was the threat. There exists a photograph taken by a combat photographer with the 101st Airborne Division that captures the essence of what the gliders meant. It shows a CG-4A nose down in a Norman hedgerow, its tail jutting skyward at an angle, one wing torn completely off. In the foreground, 3 American soldiers sit eating K-rations, their backs against the wrecked glider, weapons propped beside them, looking for all the world like men on a casual picnic. Behind them, visible through the broken fuselage, lies the overturned jeep they had ridden to Earth. The caption, written in the photographer's hand, reads, "Furniture Delivery, France, June 6, 1944. The image circulated among German intelligence units, and a Luftwaffe analyst wrote in the margin, "Note the casual attitude. Note the wrecked equipment treated as disposable. This is the American way of war." The transformation in German perception was documented in the evolution of their defensive doctrine. By late 1944, German anti-aircraft training manuals included extensive sections on glider defense, a topic that had been absent from earlier editions. Glider landing zones were to be obstructed with poles, wires, and ditches. The famous Rommelspargel, or Rommel's asparagus, that appeared across northern France. But these defenses acknowledged something fundamental. The gliders worked, and they worked because America possessed something Germany had lost: the ability to wage industrial warfare on a scale that treated sophisticated weapons as disposable items. The wooden glider, built by furniture makers and flown once into enemy territory before being abandoned, was the perfect expression of American material philosophy. It was not elegant. It was not precisely engineered. It was effective, and there were thousands more where it came from. The pilots who survived their glider missions received no special recognition beyond the standard combat decorations. They were not considered true pilots by many in the Army Air Forces, since they flew unpowered aircraft. They received no flight pay bonus after their glider training. Their uniforms bore the wings of a pilot, but their role was to crash with controlled precision and then fight as infantry. Flight Officer Michael Santarelli, who flew in Normandy, Market Garden, and Varsity, wrote in his memoirs, "We were the disposable pilots, flying disposable aircraft, and we knew it. But we also knew we were doing something no military in history had done before. We were making airborne assault practical, affordable, and repeatable." Every glider that landed behind enemy lines proved that American industry could outproduce, outthink, and outbuild anyone. We were flying pieces of American factory production into battle, and that meant more than any individual mission. The last combat glider landing occurred on March 24, 1945, during Operation Varsity. By then, helicopter development was already promising to make the glider obsolete. The military retired the glider fleet rapidly after the war, and most of the surviving aircraft were scrapped for their materials or sold as surplus. A few ended up as crop dusters, their military hardware removed, their cargo bays converted to hold pesticide tanks. Some became mobile homes, wings removed, fuselages mounted on trailer beds. The American military mind moved on to helicopters, to jets, to guided missiles. The wooden glider became a historical curiosity, a strange footnote in the evolution of airborne warfare. But for the German commanders who had laughed at intelligence reports of American wooden aircraft, who had dismissed the glider threat as propaganda or desperation, the lesson remained indelible. The gliders proved that American warfare was different in kind, not merely in degree. It was warfare as industrial process, where soldiers were delivered to battle like products on an assembly line, where weapons were built to be thrown away, where abundance itself became a strategic weapon more powerful than any single advanced technology. In the quiet fields of Normandy today, farmers still occasionally unearth the wreckage of gliders, fragments of wood, pieces of fabric, corroded metal fittings. The land absorbed them, these wooden machines that carried young men into battle and were then left to rot where they fell. There is something profound in their disappearance, in the way they returned to earth and dissolved back into the soil they crashed upon. They were never meant to last. They were meant to deliver their cargo once, to fulfill their single purpose, and then to become nothing more than debris, as forgettable and temporary as the millions of shell casings and ration cans that littered every battlefield. But in their temporary existence, in the hours between their release over the Channel and their abandonment in French hedgerows, they changed the calculus of warfare and shattered the assumptions of an enemy who had measured strength in precision steel rather than disposable wood. The laughter of German commanders, that dismissive mockery of American wooden aircraft, echoes now only in archived documents and fading memories. It was the laughter of men who misunderstood the nature of the war they were fighting, who believed that quality would triumph over quantity, that engineering excellence could defeat industrial capacity, that a nation which built wooden aircraft must be desperate rather than abundant. They learned, in the skies over Normandy and Holland and the Rhine, that abundance deployed with competence is its own form of excellence, that 1,000 imperfect solutions can overcome 100 perfect ones, and that sometimes the most devastating weapon is not the most advanced, but the most numerous. The gliders fell silent after 1945, but their message remained: freedom. When backed by factories that never sleep, and a people determined to wage war with every resource at their disposal, cannot be contained by concrete bunkers or mockery or disbelief. It descends from the sky in wooden boxes, it lands hard and keeps fighting, and it always, always brings more than expected.